Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. Here we are, another week, a lot going on. I'm Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Edward Pichado, Esquire, and Royce Russell, Esquire. We have been with you throughout this pandemic, both the physical one that we're all still going through. The numbers are going up. So my PSA to start the show off is please use common sense with how you're navigating what we're seeing happening, washing your hands, social distancing, and wearing a mask. This pandemic has not gone away, so we really need to be conscious of what we're doing. We know that a lot of states are taking different measures now, and even across the globe, there are cases that are continuing to increase. So please stay safe and well, especially with the holidays approaching. Folks are tired. They're calling it fatigue and, social distancing fatigue, COVID-19 fatigue, but it's still killing people, especially in our community. So please be safe and practice the proper way in which we should be conducting ourselves to avoid the risk of infection. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my co-host to say hello as we dig into some very timely topics as the world has turned quite a bit since we were together for our last show. So over to you, Ed.
Well, hello, everyone. Hello, audience. Thank you for meeting with us today by video and listening to us, your wonderful audience. I think this is going to be a really good show, extremely timely in terms of the topics we're going to be discussing. So we're not out of there. Good afternoon. Welcome to Speaking Legally, and I hope you find the content educational as well as fulfilling.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Royce Russell, and let's get started because information is power. Let's go.
Indeed.
Well, now we know after the election, there's still some contention on the election, so that's not news to everyone. But do we really understand what's going on with the electorate, what needs to be certified? We're hearing all these things being thrown from pundit to pundit, depending on what station you're watching and what you're listening to. So we thought it would be great education just to understand a little bit more about what's going on and what's at stake when we talk about the electorate and how our particular government works. So there's a little video, it's about 3 minutes long, but just lean in to listen to this, and then we're going to discuss and break this down a little bit more so that you can understand with our two legal experts here what's really going on.
What the state decides, but not always.
Yeah, an elector, so as I mentioned at the outset, originally electors were thought to be able to use their discretion. That went by the wayside pretty quickly, and electors were chosen for their obedience and their loyalty to the political parties. So what we have now is an elector that chooses to not vote for their party's ticket is actually referred to as a faithless elector. And they would make the argument that they're being faithful to the original version of the Constitution. But when you and I go into the ballot box on election day, or we send our ballot in via the mail, we're actually voting for these electors, a slate of electors chosen by the political parties. Depending on who wins that state, that entire slate of electors then goes to vote for president and vice president about 6 weeks after you and I vote in mid-December of this time around. They are the ones who are ultimately charged with casting their ballots, their electoral votes. So those 538 votes that are up for grabs are actually real people, real human beings. And that's what I've studied over the years. Sometimes they do not cast their votes for who they're supposed to. As I said, they're referred to as faithless electors. It happens infrequently, but our studies have found that a number of electors actually consider that as an option more so than most would think. This past summer, the Supreme Court actually ruled on whether or not states can bind electors to the popular votes of their states. That electors can be bound to the popular votes of their state. Many people thought that would be the end of faithless electors. However, there are only 14 states that have those laws in effect. So in reality, there's over 400 essential free agents that could be producing rogue votes, and there's nothing that you could do about them except dispute them in Congress.
And it happened in 2016.
Yeah, so in 2016, there was a very interesting movement. They referred to themselves as the Hamilton Elector Movement. They were talking about Alexander Hamilton, who wrote in Federalist 68 that electors were supposed to use their judgment, especially if they thought that the republic was at risk. Mostly Democratic electors. They tried to get Republican electors to join with them. They needed around 36 electoral votes to deny Donald Trump the presidency. They were not trying to get Hillary Clinton installed as the president. Instead, they were saying, let's let some other Republican other than Trump become the president. So they threw out names like John Kasich and Colin Powell and Mitt Romney. There were 10 electors back in 2016 that tried to cast faithless votes. 7 of them were successful. 2 of them were Republicans, the rest were Democrats. So they were unsuccessful in their attempt, but for many Americans, it's kind of denying them the right to vote that they thought they were going to get back in early November. So as I said, the Supreme Court took that case up, but there's still a lot of loophole that exists in this coming election.
So, listen to Tiana. That's a mouthful. That's a mouthful for everybody to digest and understand this process. Hey, Richard, glad that you're here. Thanks for tuning in. So that was a quick video on understanding how the Electoral College works and how the votes are cast, but you dug a little bit deeper.
And Ed, before you go and define this, it would be helpful in defining this, because you've done research on this. As someone who is listening to this, I'm saying to myself, one, is this report saying, and you could please answer this, is this report saying that I, Royce Russell, and the people around me in the state of X can vote for Biden, and then my state representative or what have you is then supposed to make sure that that vote goes through for Biden, and if he does not, he actually has a discretion to decide that, you know what, Biden may not be good for us, so I'm gonna vote for someone else. It may not be Trump, but I'm gonna vote for maybe Bernie Sanders, or I'm gonna vote for someone else. And we have no power to do anything about, in particular New York, and we may not even know about it, because I don't know what rock you read this article from, but this clearly is not in the Daily News, New York Times, or any other newspaper that really, capture what is going on. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so basically, what's happening here is this: a lot of people hear about the Electoral College, and they don't really understand exactly what that means. Basically, what's happening here is this: the Electoral College is basically refers to what are called electors. The number of electors is based on the number of congressional districts plus the 2 senators of each state. I believe nationwide that number amounts to 538. You have basically the 435 members of the House of Representatives plus the 50 senators, 2 to each of the 50 states. That comes out to, I guess, 535. I think when you count in DC and so forth, that's how they come out with that 538. So basically, for instance, New York has 29 electoral votes. So that's a combination of the 2 senators and the congressional representatives that we have. So what basically happens here is that when you go into that booth and you cast your vote for Biden or Trump, it's basically you're electing an elector to then go to Congress and say, okay, the people from my state voted for Biden. Why do I say the people of my state? Because in every state except for 2, it's a winner take all system. You guys probably heard about that on election night. Winner take all. What happens is if, say, Biden and Harris get the most votes in New York, it doesn't matter if they get the most the most votes by 1 vote, 10 votes, 15 votes, it's a winner take all. If they get the plurality, the majority of the votes, they get all of the electoral votes. So they get to carry all 29 of those votes. And so what's supposed to happen is on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December. This is what it says in the Constitution, by the way, which this year is December 14th. The electors meet in all 50 states and DC, and they cast their ballots for the president. And so what they're talking about in this last video we saw, in this article that we saw, was faithless electors. What happens is that these electors promise that they're going to carry out the will of the people, that if the people in their state voted for Biden, then they are going to go and cast that vote for Biden and Harris. The problem is that this is a human being we're talking about. So let's say that human being, something happens between the time of the election and the time they have to go and cast that ballot, and they change their mind and decide, oh, you know what? I don't like the outcome. I'm going to say this. I'm going to cast the ballot for this candidate or that candidate. And that situation has actually happened. And now the gentleman in there mentioned the number, I believe, of 16 some odd individuals. I looked on.
And before you go into the numbers,
all right.
Before you go into the numbers, right?
All right.
And I know you're going to go into it. I still need an answer to my question. Before we go to second base, I got to stop at first base.
All right.
First base, I'm asking you, are you telling me that everybody in the state of New York can vote for Biden, or a majority vote for Biden, right? They are not really voting for Biden necessarily. They're voting for their electorate to cast a vote for the state of New York or New Jersey or Connecticut, stating that that state wants Biden to become president. Yes or no?
That you're. I'm sorry, because
let's backtrack. Let's backtrack.
Okay.
So the people of New York,
okay,
put in their votes.
All right.
They think that it's going to maybe some basket where you count who's going to be the president. It's not going to that basket. It's going into another basket that you just brought up. That means Royce Russell Jr. now looks at all the votes that are casted in New York, and everybody says, hey, we're going for Biden. So now Royce Russell Jr. has to go to Congress, go to the White House on the date certain, the third Thursday of the fourth Wednesday when it's sunny outside and 80 degrees.
Okay.
Has to go, and then that person has to say, the people in New York say they want Biden for president. And my question to you, is that what we're talking about? Yes or no? And then I have another question.
Well, that's what you're supposed to do.
All right, stop right there. Then the next question becomes that is there a check and balances for that system? Yes or no?
In some states.
Okay, we'll go back to that. Now, the next question is what this article is referring to, and the video is referring to, or what they call the faithless. That is a scenario where a person, Royce Russell Jr. is supposed to say Biden, and he gets up there, and for whatever reason, as you were about to go into, we can look at numbers, that person go and says, you know what, I'm going for Dr. Stacey NC Grant. I'm not going for Biden, despite what the people in New York said.
Exactly. That's why the term faithless doesn't, talk about religion, right? It doesn't talk about you saying you're Christian and you go up there and you say you're Muslim or Zoroastrian. That's not what's happening here. What's happening is that loyalty oath. You're supposed to, take an oath, say that, you're going to carry out the will of the people of your state in terms of the electoral outcome, and you go and you do otherwise. So I'm going to give you a quick example. In 2016, there was 7 what they called faithless electors. 3 of them were from Washington State, and they cast their votes for, one of them cast their votes for Republican Colin Powell instead of Democrat Hillary Clinton. One of them cast their vote for a Native American candidate named Faith Spotted Eagle. And another elector, I believe from Hawaii, said, you know what, instead of Hillary Clinton, I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders. Okay, that's what we're talking about. One Republican from Texas casted his vote for John Kasich instead of Donald Trump. So what, and also let me explain something here, because you may ask, well, who are these electors? Who are these people? Normally, these electors are pretty prominent people from that party. Like, for instance, in New York, for instance, the electors are people like Tish James, people like Tom DiNapoli, who's the state controller. These are prominent Democrats who pledged to, go to Congress on a date certain and cast the vote on behalf, who are supposed to, in this instance, go and say, okay, we cast New York's vote for Biden. Okay, there's 29 of these electors coming from New York, right? But God forbid, let's say, one of these electors decide that they don't want to uphold that oath and cast a vote for somebody else, unless that state has a law that binds that elector, then that person gets to go ahead and cast that. And what I'm talking about is, for instance, Oklahoma imposes a civil penalty. So does North Carolina. In South Carolina, an elector who violates his pledge is subject to criminal penalties. In New Mexico, it's a 4th-degree felony. In Michigan, a candidate who fails to vote as required is considered to have resigned, and a replacement elector is appointed.
I can only see the penalty being a criminal offense. I mean, because most of the people that are in positions that they're even running for office, and correct me if I'm wrong, have the financial wherewithal to actually run for office and have the backings, whether it's their name for a long period of time or whether it was whatever interest group has the financial wherewithal. So paying a fine is not really heavy lifting, but being charged with criminality and having to resign seems like that is more in play. And what should happen if people from your state entrust with you to move forward with their actions that they put on pen and paper through the ballot, and that now you're moving in your own spirit because you're going to tell us what is best. And that is just for the states that you have named, and I'm sure there's others that even have what we call a checks and balance system, because there's a bunch of states that don't even have that. And I know New York is one of them.
Yeah, New York is one of them. One of the things I want to take a step back, by the way, right after the election, well, not right after, but after the vote election occurs, people cast their votes. The legislature, depending on the winner of the popular vote, is then supposed to go ahead and appoint these electors, okay? So in New York, the Democratic Party is going to say, okay, the people in our state voted for the Democratic candidate. These are the electors who are going to go and cast the vote on behalf of that candidate. Legislature appointment, right? One of the dark scenarios that have come up in terms of some folks who are conspiracy theory minded, given the fact that we have Donald J. Trump, who has refused to concede, is a dark scenario where a Republican-led legislature decides, you know what, forget about the popular vote, forget what happened there. We're going to appoint electors who are going to go and cast a vote for Donald Trump. And so that's what a lot of people are concerned with in terms of this electoral college system. Because first of all, it's not a one person, one vote system. That's how things work in many parts of the world. If you cast that vote, boom, that's the guy who wins. If enough people join me and vote for that man or woman, that's who, wins. But here in the United States, for some historical reasons, which we can get into at some other point, you have this electoral college system, in which these individuals, these electors, these representatives take your vote and then cast this vote on your behalf. And that's where the problems really begin, because really the Constitution and the way our system works, a lot of it is based on the idea that the loser is going to be gracious enough to concede. And when you have somebody that's not going to concede, then, some real problems can occur in terms of making sure that everybody else in the system does what they're, supposed to do, but if they don't, it can cause a lot of problems.
I think a lot is made in reference to this particular president and following what we call routine procedural practices, that if the numbers are not in my favor, then I need to step down. I'm not so quick to say that if Obama or Harris was president and numbers were coming in close, and numbers were coming in like within the percentages for which you can have a recount and all of this, that person shouldn't ask for the same thing that this president is asking for. Now, he has the cloak of cynicism. He has the cloak of quote unquote evildoer in the sense of how he's perceived. But, there is no participation trophies. There's a winner and there's a loser. And if I'm going to fight, and I think this is where sometimes the Democrats miss the writing on the wall, are we going to fight? Let's fight all the way to the end. Like, the bowing down and like, the Bush v. Gore, fight all the way to the end, because the rules are set up for that, to do that. If you do it with good faith, right? Then don't have a recount in a place where you totally lost, right? And there is no requirement. Maybe you got to do is say, I want to recount, and we could talk about that, and as we move through this segment. But if there's a good faith basis to say, I want to challenge, I think far too many times when it comes down to the parties, Republican or Democrat, Democrats don't take it to the fullest extent. Like, yo, look, I want you to do everything and anything. Let me see where the numbers are.
Well, I do have to I do have to slightly disagree, because you're using the term parties, and the parties that we know today haven't always been the parties that they are or have been in the past.
I'm only using what I know for the.
No. It's fine. I mean,
on this earth, I'm only using those.
No.
And I know Republicans used to have the stint of Democrats back in the day, and Democrats used to have the stint of Republicans. We can flip it. I know who was for slavery and who wasn't. I got all that. But in this era after Lionel Richie, this era, you know what I'm saying? What we doing?
Well, what I'm trying to refer to. I'm sorry, Dr. Grant.
Yeah, I just want to jump in before you go back and forth to explain with Mr. Russell. I just want to go back to how you're explaining what the electors do. This is just for the president and the vice president, correct?
Yes.
So people understand that when they do cast their vote, popular vote does matter in the other elections, but this is particularly for the president and vice president. I'll tell you one thing, all those people who didn't pay attention to U.S. government when they were in school, they're getting a crash course now on seeing what's happening. But finish your point before we go to the next part of this discussion on what's happening with the accusations of fraud, of what Ms. Russell just brought up and what people are saying. Are you going to fight, and are you going to wait until certain things happen? I'll reserve my comments until you finish explaining it.
Yeah, just briefly. This is not the first time something like this has happened. Back in the late 1800s, a guy named Samuel J. Tilden, who was a Democrat out of New York, actually struck even with the Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes, who was the governor of Ohio. Samuel J. Tilden was the governor of New York, and they came out dead even on the electoral vote count, and the tie break fell to the Congress, And according to the Tilden folks, there were some shenanigans that were being perpetrated by the Republicans at that time, who had control of the House and I believe the Senate. General Ulysses S. Grant was the president at the time, and ultimately the only they were able to break this tie is through a compromise that eventually caused Union troops to be removed from the South. These were troops after the Civil War who were protecting blacks, and at that time Republican office holders and candidates, and it was basically the effective start of, or the end rather of Reconstruction. So, just a historical note, at that time, Democrats were, if you will, the bad guys, and the Republicans were the good guys, and they took it to the mat at that point. But I just wanted to mention that briefly. We've heard of Samuel J. Tilden High School. Look it up. I believe it's called the 1872 or 1876 compromise. So,
I can tell you right now, the fact that you even discussing this and that we even delved into the subject matter, you want to talk about conspiracy theories. Right now, this is probably shocking the conscience of a lot of people, saying this right here is a conspiracy in and of itself. I thought I was voting for who I was voting for. I didn't know I was voting for someone to then go ahead.
Sorry, Bobby.
When I drive to McDonald's, I'm ordering my meal. I didn't know I was ordering my meal on the internet, and then somebody else was making sure it went through, and then I went and picked it up because I'm pissed off when it's the wrong meal. This is not what I ordered. And what you're telling me is that I may not find that out. Look, the person that I voted for to become president may still become president, but I may not find out that my guy did the wrong thing. And that's why when you talk about uniformity and you're talking about the penalties, maybe the penalties should be of a criminal nature.
Yeah, no. Listen, the Supreme Court said that the states are allowed to bind their electors to make them stick to their oath. The problem, of course, is that the commentator in that one video talked about, I believe, 14, but on the National Conference of State Legislatures site, they talked about more states than that quote unquote attempt to bind, depending on the strength of the wording of their laws, attempt to bind their electors, and New York is not on that list for some reason. So this definitely is worrisome, and is the reason why a lot of people are calling for an end to the electoral college, because it's basically a vestige of a very disturbing history of allowing southern states, less populous states at the time of the dawn of the Constitution, the ability to be on par with the so-called northeastern, more popular states. But it can definitely lead to some disturbing results under the wrong circumstances.
Here is some advice that I'm sorry, Dr. Grant, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Sonia, Jason, Kevin for joining in with Richard. Thank you for your comments. We're reading them and seeing what you're saying and agreeing with what's happening. And it might be an end to the Electoral College depending on what happens, but it's a conversation that needs to happen, that people need to understand how in 2020 and moving forward do we need to conduct. But what I'm concerned about is just how fragile democracy is at this moment. But go ahead with your point, Mr. Russell.
Well, what I was going to say was that we talk about conspiracy theories. There's no conspiracy about it. If you know your history, this is what is out there. We're not making it up. It's not anything that all of a sudden it just happens when Trump has run for president. It's there. This is what I mean. Whether or not somebody breaks the glass window, they use it. The fire extinguisher is there. Shit, is the fire. You gonna not break the glass window? You gonna look at it and say, "Oh, let me find the key. The second floor is on fire. Let me find the key." And so I say all this to say that we try to bring the culture and the legal together. But I'll give this word of advice as Ed went through something that is not necessarily his expertise. Well, it's not his expertise, and it's not my expertise. But what makes him a great attorney, and what should be the litmus standard that people use in deciding who's a good attorney and who's not, is that your attorney will admit that they don't know the answer, but guess what? They know where to go to places to get the answer. And so even though no question was posed to us, we know that this is something that was on the post and on the minds of our viewers and listeners. And so we went to go get the answers. We went to try to find the answers to present them and bring them forward. And we're not bringing in any dark, secret way that we want you to run away from your powers and your election, your right to vote, but you need to understand it. So when you're having that discussion, maybe you can educate someone, or maybe you can denounce someone that is talking silliness and nonsense, and reframe the question and a discussion.
Absolutely.
So, I mean,
Yeah,
that's what we're here for.
And I agree, because really what's happening here is the raw exercise of power. The people are looking, and they're looking for the loopholes, and they're saying, wait a minute, I don't have to concede. There's nothing in there that says that I have to concede
That's
this
right.
election.
That's right. And there's
In
nothing
fact,
wrong with that.
yeah,
There's nothing wrong with that.
you know, this stuff about these electors, wait a minute, they don't have to say, they don't have to vote for this guy? Oh, okay. You know, that's what's happening here. People are sitting down and engaging in the raw exercise of power. They're reading the law, they're reading the Constitution, and they're trying to see, well, how does this benefit me? And what happens is that they then say, you know what, I'm going to stir up this stuff about fraud, whether it's true or not, enough so that if somebody else, if one of these electors goes off the rail, or if one of these Republican-led legislators does something other than, you know, what they can or supposed to, you know, do, and the law doesn't prohibit it, then that's what we're doing. We're going to go all out, and we're going to go all the way, and damn it if people don't, or some people, you know, don't like it. And so so right now you have this issue of people saying there's fraud when there's no evidence. Lawyers are going into court and being asked, well, where's the fraud? Do you have evidence? Well, not really, but damn, you ended up filing this order to show cause, or this summons and complaint, and you know, a lot of this is to a certain degree for effect. And
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that there are abuses in the legal system, right? And whether or not there's actual fraud, and if there's not fraud, there should be sanctions that should be filed. But we know that those sanctions will not exist. And sanctions for those out there, penalties filed on law firms and lawyers for filing something that is frivolous in the courtroom, something that they know that they cannot prove. However, these loopholes and strategies exist, whether we're talking about the election or whether we're talking about eviction, whether we're talking about the election and the presidency, or whether we're talking about getting evicted from 517 East 42nd Street in Brooklyn, right? You know what I mean? The person that's getting evicted is using all the loopholes to stay, and the person that wants the person to be evicted is using everything they can to get that person evicted. And we shouldn't lose sight of that. And I think we're losing sight of some of that, and we think that it's supposed to be played out this way, that this happens and then this happens, and that's not necessarily so. And people of color, we should know that we need to shake the jar and let the snowflakes go around, because if we can watch and see how the game is played, how the power is played, how it's being used, retain that information, you know, put that information away. So when it's your turn, no stops, pull it all out. And once again, we speak from a perspective of evil, bad doing, because we're talking about a person that we perceive and actually has and done some things that people are like, hey, look, that's a bad person. But when you move away, when you strip that away, he's going straight down to what's on the books. Straight that is on the books. We can do this. That looks like it helps me. Let's do it. And our people, we go, we can do this, and that can help us. Nah, that may hurt his feelings. Nah, that may do this. Nah, that's mine. And we don't do that. You understand what I'm saying? So if power is not conceded, it's taken. We've heard that so many times in so many places, by so many voices, by so many faces. And so let's get to it. And so although we're in this space and place and time, I think it's been educational. It's been wonderful. It is going to the nuts and bolts of what's out there. and a true victim will be called, and that would be the end. But in the meantime, we are learning so much, and I would like to continue that education. Dr. Grant, you have something you want to say?
Yep, I want to just move straight into, now that we're talking about pushing the needle and playing full out, doing what you can do. There are recounts that are happening in certain places. And this is one that's on the top of everybody's agenda today, because Georgia has decided to do a full by hand count of the presidential ballots, according to the Secretary of State. And you were doing some research on this voter fraud, and clearly some of these allegations are false, and there probably won't be any recourse for those, but there's a standard for the recount. So I want to get into that as we're watching this play out, how that's going to affect the overall results.
So let me say a couple of things to that, right? Because once again, I don't know everything. I just act like I do on TV, right? So doing the research and doing the work, first we'll start with, and I'm gonna read a lot of things because I ain't too proud to read. As a matter of fact, with the mind is a terrible thing to waste, right? So when we talk about recounts, what is a recount? It's the process for which votes casted in an election are recounted to verify the accuracy of the original votes. That's what a recount is. I said I want 2 apples. Man, you put 2 apples in my bag. I'm looking in my shopping bag. There go the 2 apples. Just that plain and simple. I bought 2 apples. I'm looking on my receipt. I only see 1 charge. Let's go in the bag. There go 2. All right, now I have to charge you for the 2nd apple. Plain and simple. And recounts occur when, 1, there's close margins of victory or loss. See, a lot of people think, oh, recount when I'm losing, right? But it can happen in victory or loss, right? If there's any hesitation or verification, that's when it can happen. Accusation of election fraud, and that's what we hear being bantered around. And administrative error. Something went wrong. A machine wasn't working. There was nothing nefarious about it, but something just, the Chad was hanging. Something went wrong, and so we need to look at that again. And so in doing my research, I keep on hearing certified and Canvas, and I wanted to know what was the difference. It turns out that it's almost one and the same. And so I'll give you what the definition of Canvas is before I go into my spreadsheet, what really happens in the recount. So Canvas is the official tallying of all votes to account for every single ballot cast to ensure its validity. I'll say it again. It's the official tallying of votes to account for every single ballot cast and to ensure its validity. It is as close to a certification as possible, making sure one person, one vote, and that vote is accurate. Now, why is that important? Because we are in a place in a state, a place and time where a recount is happening. It's going to happen. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Because we have close margins, and we have allegations of fraud, and we have allegations of administrative error using markers, instead of using pencil or black pen, or using blue pen and black pen, they're using markers. There is accusation of fraud, true or false accusation, and we have close margins. So what I venture to do is look at the states that I thought that was important. And Ed, if you think there's another state that's important, or Dr. Grant, you can chime in. I looked at Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, North Carolina, and Philly. I looked at the big 6, right?
Pennsylvania.
Right, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, right. Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, you got it, right? Then I look at the categories going across, whether or not you get an automatic recount. Just automatically. State said we just recount. That's what we do. Whether it has to be a margin for there to be a recount, a margin of loss, some close number. The biggest one, who pays for it? See, a lot of people jump up, recount, until their check get garnished. And then all of a sudden, maybe we don't want so many recounts, right? So who pays for it? Whether or not there's a discrepancy or error, is that a reason? And what are the deadlines? So with that being said, bear with me, because we named the cities, and we named the states. So let's go with Georgia. Georgia, there is no automatic recount. Doesn't automatically happen. There has to be a margin that is less or equal to 0.5%. All right? Who paid for it? The state of Georgia. If there's a discrepancy or error, the political party or the election official can call for the recount. Deadline. Now you want to hear this about a deadline, Ed? You were talking about tricky in the wording. Must be made 2 business days following certification. In this case, November 7th. Certified 14 days after the election, and there's really no deadline to say we've done. So you got timelines, but no deadlines. Arizona, automatic recount. There is an automatic recount. All right, you don't have to request one. Margin of error. If there's a margin in the recount, 200 votes in the case of an office to be filled by state electors for which the total number of votes cast is over 25,000. So this is one of those cases where it's over 25,000. So 200 votes. Who pays for it? The state doesn't know. The state doesn't know. They haven't really had a policy for who pays for it. So I said 200 votes, right? So less than 0.1% or cast, or 200, whichever is less. So that's the standard. Less than 0.1% of the casted votes or 200 votes, whichever is less, right? Discrepancy, yes, if there's 200 votes or less, or 0.1%. And deadline, no deadline. No deadline. Nevada, automatic recount, no. Can you request it? Yes. Who pays for it? The requester.
That's the same in Wisconsin, right?
That's Nevada, but Wisconsin is the same thing. So requester, right? Mm-hmm. Does it have to be a discrepancy in error? No. Now, it has to be completed within 10 days of the request and within 3 days after certification. So 10 days, so 10 days after the request of the requester and completed within 3 days after certification. I don't even know what those dates are, but that's what we got. Michigan, automatic recount. Yes, if there's a discrepancy of 2,000 votes or less. Now, in this particular case, in Michigan, in this particular election, I think as of November the 6th, the number was 146,000 vote discrepancy. So maybe there won't be a challenge there, right? Who pays for it? The requester. So Donald Trump, Republican Party, whoever, they pay for it. Now, what they say is, as far as discrepancy and administrative error, this is the funny language. The requester can request if there is a reasonable chance of winning the election. So there is no numbers. So now you're in this gray area. Is there a reasonable chance of winning the election?
And I would imagine a judge has to interpret that language. I
would say that is more gray than your beard. That's what I would call. Right? Deadline. Check this deadline out. Within 48 hours, so I just like to say 2 days, but they want to use 48 hours, right? So 2 days after the canvass, no later than 30 days to complete. So at least there's a timeline to complete it. You get 1 month, right? So now Wisconsin, your favorite state, all right? It has to be 0.1%, or excuse me, 0.7%, right? Margin of recount, 0.7%, somewhere between 0.1 and 0.7%. Who pays for it? All right. The requester pays for it. If the margin is greater than 0.25%, then the state will pay for it. That's interesting. So they'll split that, right? No recount based upon discrepancies. They don't have that. Now, when are the timelines? First business day after the canvass, within 13 days of order. I had no idea what that meant, and I still have no idea what that means. But there are lawyers out there that do. But I'm just letting you know, I do not. North Carolina, no automatic recount. The votes have to be 10,000 or 0.5% of the votes cast, whichever is smaller. So that has to be the discrepancy. Now, as of November 6th in North Carolina, the number was 1.4%. So we don't have to worry about that. But who knows? He might say it's some fraud. Who pays for it? The state of North Carolina. Deadlines? No deadlines. So now we do Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania. Is there an automatic recount? The answer is yes. Is there a discrepancy, a margin of error? Yeah. 0.5% of the vote or closer automatically kicks the recount. Who pays for it? The requester. Now, deadlines. Automatic recount must be done no later than the first Tuesday after the third Wednesday following the election. Let me say that again, bro, because this is your favorite. This is your favorite piece right here, right? Automatic recount must be done no later than the first Tuesday after the third Wednesday following an election. Now, I know communion happens every first Sunday. That's all I know. And I know some people know when their checks come in the month, right? But I'll repeat, automatic recount must be done no later than the first Tuesday after the third Wednesday following the election. It so happens that in this case, I got that to be November 24. Now, I just want to read one other note that I have there. All right, so now in Philadelphia, they talk about canvassing, but they talk about if there isn't that margin of error, that 0.5% vote or closer, candidates can appeal in order of the decision of the county board regarding computation or canvassing of returns or any recount or recanvass. So you could petition after this. That's what I've learned. So this is never ending. This can go on and go on and go on like the Energizing Buddy.
And it's amazing that you say that because in some of my research, I came across something interesting. A lot of people think that Bush v. Gore ended with the courts, and actually it didn't. Gore decided to eventually concede.
Exactly.
But if he wanted to, he could have, continued the count, continued to, fight that case. I mean, there were continuous legal avenues apparently. And people need to understand that. That's an extremely important point. I mean, people have been talking about for the last month or so how Amy Coney Barrett was rushed onto the court with the thought that Trump would need a majority of conservatives on the court to possibly decide this election. And that's what we're talking about here, because they start out on the state level. You have an appeal. Eventually it gets to that state's highest court, and then you could conceivably then appeal it to the Supreme Court after that. And if they take cert, if they accept the case, then that's where this scenario comes in, where this conservative majority court makes a decision. And another issue that's come up in the last couple of days is, well, let's say, based on some sort of partisan behavior that's been elicited by these justices, whether, you could try to remove them. And the answer is yes. The problem is, of course, is that the process by which you remove a Supreme Court justice is the same way you would remove a president, which we witnessed this year. You would have articles of impeachment filed in the House of Representatives, and if the House of Representatives votes to impeach, then it goes to the Senate for a trial. And right now, you have the Republicans in control of the Senate, and you will have, basically possibly the same outcome that you had for this presidential attempt to impeach and remove after trial, which was that, it didn't happen because the Senate decided that, they weren't going to remove the president based on the impeachment by the House of Representatives. Now,
so if I heard you correctly, there is no such thing as a lifetime appointment. It's only a lifetime appointment in theory. So that means if you are corrupt, and we can prove it, if you are taking payments, and we can prove it, if we can show your bias and prejudice, and we can prove it, then the lifetime appointment becomes a short lifetime appointment.
Yeah, because the Constitution talks about quote unquote good behavior. There's been two times in history that a U.S. Supreme Court justice has undergone this process. Samuel Chase, in the time of George Washington, I believe he did something that offended Thomas Jefferson at the time.
He stole one of his slaves. That what he did?
There was some. I don't remember. There was some sort of.
One of Thomas Jefferson's, back. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? That's what he did.
Well, at that time, I believe you had the Whigs and the Tories were the political parties at the time, and they attempted to remove Samuel Chase, but it wasn't successful. The House of Representatives impeached, but I believe the Senate acquitted. And then later on, you did have Abe Fortas in the time of Lyndon B. Johnson. He was found to have been taking payments as a paid consultant to some sort of family foundation when the head of it was found to be engaging in some sort of financial or securities fraud. He agreed to resign prior to being impeached or removed. So
it's okay to do that when you're president. It's not okay to do that when you sit on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Difference, brother. Or when you're Secretary of Defense or whatever, any one of those other positions. But when you're a judge and you judging others, how dare you? You know what I mean? How dare you?
Exactly. So, none of this stuff is unprecedented. Some of this stuff has either happened or almost happened. So it's important to look at all of this and be a student of history and not just take things for granted. I mean, the first concession by a presidential losing candidate was back in 1896 when William Jennings Bryan sent a telegram to William McKinley. And, after that, you had concessions, and Al Smith, former governor of New York, did the concession speech over the radio in 1928. And then, after that, you had concession speeches over television. So it's a long tradition. Apparently, the current president doesn't care about tradition. He is choosing to test the system to its limits. There have been rumors that he's vying for some sort of bargain or deal where, listen, I'll concede if you agree not to prosecute me after I leave.
Yeah. Hallelujah. Well, first of all, to your point, one is that we need to be a student of history because we know how convoluted and how our history has been lost in America. And number two, we need to wipe the shock of like, oh my God, somebody is actually doing this, and have a plan to do it yourself when time comes. And just don't be so willing to just give over. And, I was speaking on a panel the other day, and I said we were talking about prayer, spirituality, and things of that nature. And I agree with most of what was being said, but I echo one of the pastors. Prayer. He said, prayer. You need prayer, and he ended his speech with prayer. And that rubbed me a little bit because I know that prayer without without a plan will not problem solve.
Or
Right?
action.
You know, you have to pray, and there has to be a plan. Now, I'm not saying the spirituals will follow your plan, but there has to be some plan. You pray for a job, you put in applications for a job, right? Then comes problem solve. You don't pray, sit down, and problem solve. Sometimes that happens when it's health issues, but everything has to be in line. So when you talk about power and conceding of power, you know that if you have power, someone's going to take it. So you have to plan to protect that power. And we can go back to the times of David Dinkins and succession plans and putting people in places. You know, I'm mad that Trump had to turn to do it, and disappointed that we allowed him to bogart and do it. And I know Obama had his trials and tribulations in trying to make it happen. I understand, but you know, sometimes you gotta punch somebody in the eye. Sometimes.
Well, listen, brother. Check this out. I was watching the Fox News channel the other day because I was watching CNN and MSNBC. And I said, "Damn, let me see what the other side is talking about and what they're doing." And about a third of the commercials that came on were actually religious commercials, like Christian commercials. So what I'm going to say to that is that the folks on that end of the spectrum really do believe that what they're doing is supported by their faith in God. They believe in what they're doing. So the question is, do you have the same amount of faith on the other side? We got Reverend, I believe, Pastor Warnock trying to get that Senate seat down in Georgia. And so that's an example of prayer combined with action right there. Because we're trying to put a man of the cloth into a powerful position in the U.S. Senate. And the hope is that, you know, faith with action does its job at the end of the day.
And the hope is that he don't concede and he'll take everything to the map and a recount on top of a recount on top of a recount, like his counterpart would do, to make sure that he doesn't get in.
Hold on. Y'all going down to the next show. Like we're at the top of the conversation on faith without works is dead. I think that's what you were looking for in the scripture, Mr. Russell. But
I wasn't looking for it in the scripture. I just know that my mother told me that if you want to work, you need to put an application in. And you just praying ain't going to do it. So I understand that much.
Well, there's a lot more to be said on this topic, and we could probably touch on that next week because this is obviously still going on. But what's key is narrative and communication. Here at Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural, it's an opportunity for us to talk about what's happening in real life, real time, and what we can do to arm ourselves with the right information and to take some notes. I watched Fox like you, Mr. Fajardo, to see what they were going to say. I watched MSNBC, CNN, ABC, all the news channels. Here's one of the lessons to take away. You have to control your own narrative because people can make lies seem real and real seem false. If you don't know how to fact check on your own, if you don't know the history to the full story and conversation, and we're hoping that our viewers are always arming themselves with the analytical, critical thinking that it's going to require for you to weed through and sift through to get to the truth. Because this is what we need to talk about with our young people who are frustrated watching what we see playing out. And to your point, clear, concession wasn't something that was listed as a law, but it's been a tradition. It's been the way things have been done. And we're unearthing a lot of what we've seen happen in this country for centuries. And now we're going to have to deal as a nation and as a country with how do we move forward in the best way for all of the constituents that this United States of America is supposed to serve. And we know it hasn't been quite united lately. So we pray that in the midst of all of this, prayer still works. That's what I believe. I can't tell you what to believe, but that we will get to a point where we can move forward in a positive way for our country because the world is watching. And I'm thinking about my children and my children's children. What kind of world will this be when they enter if we don't act on the right side of history in this moment? So lots more to discuss, of course. Thank you both for breaking down how the Electoral College works actually with the votes that are cast so that we understand that, what it means to be able to ask for a recount, and in the 6 states that Mr. Russell went over, what the requirements are. And we see there's not a lot of uniformity with how this is happening. So whatever happens is going to force us to look at what we need to do to make more effective systems within our country. That's the bottom line. So thank you, Kevin, for tuning in. Hey, Dr. Elston, I see you hanging out with us as well. Jason, Richard, we appreciate you. Sonia, all of you who catch the replay, who share this out. We appreciate you participating in our conversation with Speaking Legally. We're here at 4 p.m. every Wednesday Eastern Standard Time, so you can catch the replays. They're up on YouTube as well at Destiny Designers TV, or you can follow Mr. Pichardo or Mr. Russell on their pages and see the replays as well. So I'll let my co-hosts give their final remarks before we close out today's show. Remember what I said when I opened. The pandemic is still raging. Please wash your hands, social distance, wear your mask, do whatever you need to do to protect yourself and your family. I know the holidays are coming up, but let's not get too lax because we don't want to see what happens in our community with the numbers and the losses we've already endured for 2020. We want to mitigate what could potentially happen in this fall and winter season. So over to you, Mr. Russell, and then to you, Mr. Pichardo.
Well, I agree with your sentiments. And even when we look at the pandemic and we look at COVID, we know that you can pray that you don't get it. You better plan by wearing masks and gloves so you don't get it. And hopefully the problem you'll be able to solve by not getting it. And so we need to be conscious as a people that we shouldn't be shocked by the overturning and going to the bottom line of every bottom line to get what we want. As a matter of fact, we should embrace it because tradition has not always been our tradition, nor should it always be our tradition in the future. And so think out of the box, think about what's important to you, stay steadfast to your beliefs because there are others that will stay and will go through the night while you have long gone given up because you say it's not important. It's very much important. So I hope to see you on the next time, and we have more information to give you.
All right, everyone. I'm glad you were able to join us this afternoon. I hope that you found this information informative, but more importantly, I hope it stirs us to action. I hope it allows us to keep our faith. This was a historic election where Black people in particular, people of color, Latinos, Asians, came out and voted and showed the power of our vote, and it shouldn't stop, and we shouldn't stop pressing because some people are saying that some of the stuff that we're asking for is turning some people towards voting conservative, and my thing is that what, if that's how it has to go down, that's how it has to go down. We just got to make sure that we register more of our people, that more of our people come out, that more of them vote. And we'll match up our vote any day against the other side in order to get what's righteously ours, what's right. Okay, so, all I'm going to say is, in conclusion, keep the faith, baby.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't shout out all the Black Girl Magic that made this happen. So, the next vice president-elect of the United States of America looks like me. So I'm very happy about that and happy about Stacey Abrams and the work that she did. 800,000 voters registered in the state of Georgia. It's not over. That recount is going to be critically important come the top of the year. So there are fundraising efforts that are going on to help them down there. So do your part to still stay engaged. I know it's frustrating listening and watching everything that's going on, but be encouraged. Change will happen. And this time, the revolution is clearly being televised. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you same time, same place next week.